there are many studies to show the reliability, and in many cases, we have to prove above 90% reliability. And there are certain, I want to say, there's parameters around this. So, for example, right, the Edwards hypotension tool. Okay, when they predict, right, the accuracy is less for when the future occurs. So, for example, right, the accuracy is about 80% in predicting hypotension 20 minutes into the future. But when you go to 5 minutes in the future, it goes above 95%. You bring down to 1 minute, it goes to almost 100%, right? Because the closer you are to the event, there's more data points, and the more the algorithm can crunch and do that, right?
Great. So while the attendees are joining in, welcome to the Blue Circle. It's such a big privilege and pleasure to connect with everyone and our distinguished keynote speaker who's handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience he brings in. Thank you also to our distinguished audience for joining us, most of whom were CEOs, CXOs, and senior leaders. Many of them are our members and are repeat visitors to our webinars. This is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue through the online mode as well. For those of you who are new with us today, Blue Circle is the world's first sector-specific networking app for business leaders that's built in India. We currently focus on 20 sector communities such as healthcare, e-mobility, renewable energy, real estate, and many more. We also present socioeconomic insights, which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. Along with our weekly webinar series and our digital publication, you will be happy to know that we have recently launched the first version of the Blue Circle app for leaders, somewhat like the sector-specific LinkedIn for senior leaders, a space to have meaningful conversations, connect with over 10,000 plus like-minded leaders from India and across the globe, house high-quality curated content, and access business opportunities across these sectors. Those leaders among you who are interested, please do join us. I will share the link to the app in the chat section, and will soon be sending out invitations to our new guests. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's keynote speaker, Mr. V. Yao NG, MD India, Edwards Lifesciences. He spearheads a company's strategic planning process for the intercontinental region and ensures its effective execution by collaborating with global colleagues and business units. At present, he's focused on building and leading Edwards' commercial activities in India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. He strongly believes that the company can mature into a self-sustaining organization through innovation by launching the latest medical advancements and making them accessible to Indian patients on the back of Edwards' global mission and vision. And for today's topic, Mr. V. Yao will be discussing AI in healthcare. Now I request Mr. V. Yao to please begin the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I'm so honored to, in the presence of such distinguished audience, and and my time here in India has been great, and this is a great honor for me. So let me start by maybe giving a small introduction on Edwards very quickly, if I may. Edwards is a small mid-sized medical device company, and we are a very focused company. And we're the global leader for patient-focused medical device innovations in two areas in particular: structural heart disease and critical care monitoring. Edwards was founded in 1958 by Miles Lowell Edwards. It's an inventor and visionary. This is that gentleman over here in this picture. That's Miles Lowell Edwards. He has over 60 patents. And he, together with another physician here, Dr. Albert Starr, were the inventors of artificial heart valve. And that's how Edwards started off. And, today Edwards is a trusted partner with physicians, and we have introduced many innovative medical devices in the area of structural heart disease and critical care monitoring. That's where Edwards is. We have a global footprint. Our headquarters for the Greater India region is in Mumbai. That's where I'm located at. Uh, Globally, we have over 15,000 employees with many regional headquarters and manufacturing facilities all over the world. Here in Asia, obviously, we have a manufacturing facility in Singapore. Other manufacturing facilities are in Central America and in Europe and in US. So just a brief introduction of products. Today, I'm going to talk about AI in healthcare. And as an example, I'm going to talk about one of our products in the critical care and vascular division. It's a division about hemodynamic monitoring, and we'll talk a bit about that. Beyond critical care and vascular, in India, we do provide surgical heart valves to the cardiac surgeons in India. And we provide state-of-the-art, best-in-class heart valves today. On top of that, we also provide transcatheter heart valves to interventional cardiologists. This is whereby a heart valve aortic heart valve is replaced through a small incision in the groin of a patient in the transcatheter manner without open heart surgery. And this is also available in India. So enough about Edwards. So let's talk about AI. And before I talk about that, maybe a little bit of history on the Industrial Revolution, right? We all know, the first Industrial Revolution was powered by the steam, right? This was the steam revolution that occurred around the end of 18th century. And when we went to the start of the 20th century, we had, the second Industrial Revolution, which is mass production powered by electricity. In the 70s, that ushered in the third Industrial Revolution, and this is fueled by computers. We call that the information age, right? Today, as we all know, we are in the midst of the fourth Industrial Revolution, which is, through data transformation, with smartphones, cloud computing, and AI. So that's where we are living in the world today, and this started around 2007, right? So predominantly, so these are pictures of how healthcare is progressing along with the industrial revolutions. And today we know AI is revolutionizing many industries. Okay, some examples: personal digital assistant. Everybody knows about Siri, Alexa, Google Home, or even, virtual customer service chat box, right? When we go into websites, for that, right? We also have AI powering personalized social media feeds. For example, Facebook, YouTube, right? They use AI to, to make recommendations. AI is in navigation to optimize our routes, looking at traffic information in Google Maps, Apple Maps, even in the area of stock trading, right? You have AI-based stock trading software, and this company Trade Ideas provide that. So we see AI today in many areas and many industries in this world today. And I'm sure some of you are also in these areas. Now, what about healthcare, right? AI in healthcare today is here and real, okay? And they fall predominantly in four areas. One of them is drug development. Is used to identify target molecules, to discover drug candidates, speed up clinical trials, and also to finding biomarkers to diagnose diseases. Okay, and the areas that AI is being utilized or going to be utilized is also to personalize treatment. right? Different patients respond to treatments differently. And as such, physicians need to design the right treatment plan for the right patient. Very topical today and front of the line. AI also can be used to monitor and predict epidemic outbreaks, right? We hear things from the experts are saying that, okay, we have reached the crest of the wave and the wave is coming down. We predict the wave is going to reach its max at a certain time. So these are all using AI computer models to help, epidemiologists to predict, right, and monitor, predict outbreaks. But however, by and far, AI is used the most in clinical decision support systems. And they're used in many areas like cardiology, endocrinology, nephrology, gastroenterology, neurology. A lot of it is in oncology and in critical care medicine. Right today, I'm going to talk about how it's used in critical care medicine, because that's the solution that in Edwards we provide to Indian patients. So let me take a step back and talk about you know clinical instability and the patient, right? So when you have a critically ill patient, right, in typically yesterday, right, the patient can move from a stable state where he or she is well to an unstable state where he or she has a certain illness, right? And doctors today use monitoring technologies to detect, to help them detect, right? For example, they take the blood pressure, they take the temperature, they do blood tests, urine tests, to detect instability, right? However, right, before the patient is sick or unstable, there are signs of early instability, right? And this early instability today is can be detected in very high acuity and very precise machines and monitors today. Okay. And in many cases, early, even going beyond early instability, that's where AI can come in, right? And in Edwards, we have developed a AI tool to predict hypotension, which is, in layman's term, hypotension is low blood pressure. Okay. And the definition is of a low blood pressure. There are many different definitions, but one common one is that the mean arterial pressure, which is the average pressure in the artery, goes below 65 millimeters of mercury. Okay. So why managing hypotension is important as in the hospital setting, especially for the critically ill patients? It's important because it has been shown that by having a low blood pressure, okay, there's association with poor cardiac outcomes, myocardial infarction, acute kidney injury, and delirium, right? So it is very important, for patients who are undergoing procedures, especially high-risk patients and high-risk procedures, surgeries in hospitals, and patients in the ICU, that the blood pressure is not too low, right? It's maintained at 65 and above, right? So, Edwards AI tool, right, is the first of its kind technology on Edwards advanced monitoring platform that provides information regarding the likelihood that the patient is trending towards a hypotensive event. That means before the blood pressure goes to 65, the tools give the clinician, right, the anesthesiologist and the intensive care doctor that say, hey, look, the patient is trending towards, a hypotensive event. Please take a look, right? And it's to predict hypotension, effective in detecting, instability and reducing intraoperative hypotension. And this is the first type of AI technology in the hemodynamic monitoring world that's approved by the US FDA, and it's also approved by the Indian CDSCO, right? Regulatory agencies. So how does it work, right? And how do we use AI to create this tool to predict hypertension? You start with the waveform, right? The pressure waveform. Okay. And the R&D engineers in Edwards, from the waveform, right? They look at different features of the waveform and different combinations of features, and to try to predict and how when the patient is going to be hypotensive, right? And you start off with over 2.6 million features that you can derive from arterial waveform. Some examples I put here: aortic compliance, stroke volume, vascular tone, afterload, full cardiac cycle, contractility, and so on and so forth, right? And that's very technical details. So 2.6 million features, and you run through two different machine learning techniques to build an algorithm, right? So from 2.6 million, you narrow down using individual feature performance analysis to narrow down to 62 different features. And from 62, you use another AI tool called sequential feature selection to drill down to 23 of the most predictive features in the waveform that can predict hypotension. And out of this, an AI algorithm, right, with a logistical regression model is built. So using the 23 most predictive features, right, they use a machine learning algorithm, right, using logistical regression that will predict a patient's status, whether is the patient, trending towards hypotensive, or they are not trending towards hypotensive. So if they're trending towards hypotensive, an alarm will trigger, right? And the clinicians were able to look at all the different signs and the different readings to make a determination on how to intervene to prevent the patient from being hypotensive, right? So in critical care medicine today, right? So what's going to happen, right? So, in the past, the machines are detecting what's happening to the patient, like I mentioned, right? Temperature, blood pressure, okay? It's what's happening. So today, with this AI predictive monitoring, right? The machines are telling us to predict what's going to happen, right? An example I like to use is this, right? You know, in the past, right? When I say past means, past our forefathers. How does one tell the weather? You look out the window, you see the sky is blue, there's very little clouds. So, oh, it's a nice day. Okay, it's gonna be a beautiful day. But little do they know that, say, okay, behind the mountains or further away, there are thunder clouds and there's storm clouds is brewing, that the wind is going to blow and it's going to rain in the afternoon. In the morning, they wake up, they look at it, it's nice and clear. Oh, it's going to be a great day. But then, by afternoon, the wind comes, but they don't know that, right? That's what used to be. Today with AI, it's like, okay, predicting that, storm clouds are coming. And then, so before we do that, okay, if you're going out, you make sure you bring an umbrella, you bring a raincoat. So that's where AI is helping today, right? When we say clinical decision support, right? It gives the clinician an idea that the patient is trending towards hypotension. They look at all the different parameters and basically try to avoid hypotension. Tomorrow, as part of this, you're going to come with prescriptive monitoring, where they monitor and they give some suggestions for treatments, and even semi-closed loop systems whereby treatments are automatically basically administered to the patient, right? So in a nutshell, right? Okay, we're using digital tools to improve patient care, and it's a combination in the case of our critical care medicine, combination of sensors, parameters, and monitors going into algorithm and machine learning and AI. You have AI enabled monitors, you have smart algorithms, okay, that can detect, okay, hypotension. And in the future, it's going to detect other things and prevent, other bad outcomes from happening, and using smart sensors to do that. So that's where we can see the direction of AI going in healthcare. And so thank you so much for your attention. And I'm free to take any questions you might have.
So I think we can begin with the questions which we've received. I see one person who's raised their hand. If it would be great if you could just post your questions in the Q&A section. Meanwhile, I'll just open the document which we've already received. So I'll start with Mr. Pradeep Kumar Nama. He's the director and CFO of SynchroServe Global Solutions. He's asked, is there a future for doctors and their PG studies with so much taken over by AI? Does human intel still have a role to play?
Yeah, of course. At the end of the day, right? Humans always have a role to play, because number one, healthcare is very complicated. The human body is a very complex. In fact, it's the most complex machine in the world today, right? AI is there to augment and help the doctors to give better care, right? An example you could say, as a corollary, right? Today, if you look at airplanes, you got autopilots. They are very smart. In fact, they can fly the plane and they can even land the plane. But nobody says the pilot is not required. The pilot is always there, right? Even to land the plane and all that. So at the end of the day, I don't believe, at least in our lifetimes, right, we're going to have, AI is going to replace doctors. You always need to have the human intervention, because AI always looks at, specific areas. For example, right, the tool that Edwards have, right, it only looks at hypotension, blood pressure. It doesn't look at all other different areas of the patient, right? For example, it doesn't look at the blood tests. It doesn't look at the chemistry. It doesn't look the blood chemistry and such, and so on and so forth. So it's part of the solution, right? The doctor is taking everything into place and using his knowledge and experience to make a better judgment, and to be able to treat the patient better, and to give a treatment that's appropriate to the state of the patient there is today. I hope that answers the question.
I make it very, very clear for everyone then. So there's a question by Mr. Anurag Kashyap. He's the Director of Finance and Strategy at TR Life Science. He asks, there is the fear of accuracy of AI. Once you start using technology, humans tend to depend on it. Is this behavior going to increase the negligence cases?
Okay, so in healthcare, at least, right? Okay, healthcare, it's a regulated industry, right? We have US FDA in India, we have CDSCO. So it's not like, okay, look, I have an algorithm, I have an AI, I'm going to launch it. That doesn't work in healthcare, right? Because we're talking about treating illness, we're talking about human lives. Therefore, a lot of rigor goes into this, right? We talked about 2.6 million features and all of that. So a lot of research goes into it, and data needs to be produced to basically prove that, okay, this works, right? And there's always a sensitivity, and then there's a specificity of every technology, right? That's why I say, at the end of the day, doctors know this. There's a chance that, okay, the machine could be wrong. We all know this, right? You could have a false positive, for example, COVID test, or you could have a false negative COVID test. It doesn't happen all the time, but it could happen. So that also, in essence, answers the question, right? So when we talk about that, there are regulations, and regulators are put in place to ensure that, the nightmare scenario, right, whereby the machine is, constantly giving bad advice and wrong advice. That does not happen, right? Because so from there, and just to talk about behavior, right? In fact, the opposite is true. uh as human beings, you know the reality is that, okay, the first I guess the first impression, or the what people say, they tend to distrust AI more than they trust AI first, right?
Correct.
The AI actually needs to prove himself, right? It's very easy. The minute you have the AI makes one mistake, oh, okay, it's terrible, we should not do it, right? And it's bad. Okay. So in fact, I think a lot of companies who are dealing with AI, especially in the healthcare industry, are very cognizant about this. That you only get one chance to get it right. The minute if you get it wrong, it's, people will not adopt it. Doctors will not adopt it, right? So therefore, a lot of research goes into it, a lot of care goes into it, right? For example, to get a US FDA to approve, the product, right? It took, almost 10 years for Edwards, right, to do the research, get all the data, and a lot of back and forth discussions. There were a lot of questions. And same thing here in India, right? CDSO gave a lot of questions. We have to show a lot of data and to show that, okay, look, it really works. And as with any technology, there are limitations, right? And that's written very well. And we're very transparent about it, right? In what cases the technology does not work, and therefore, doctor, please don't use it in that situation.
Correct. Yeah. So I'll just have one more question before, because we're getting a lot of questions in the Q&A section. One
Yes.
question which we received before
Hmm.
by Mr. S. Manish Singh. He's the director at Progilence Capability Development.
Hmm.
This is a four-part question. The
Yes.
first question is, how reliable is AI for decision making in high stakes area like this?
Hmm.
Second is, while eventually we hope to get there based on vast and well structured data pools, in the interim, will it result in suboptimal decision making? Third is there a risk that doctors will blindly follow or hide behind AI based decision making and eventually will spoil the culture of skill development, perspective, and performance evaluation of healthcare staff? And lastly, will there potentially be an abdication of responsibility as a cultural impact of the introduction of AI?
Okay, so let me try to answer each one in a way, right? That's a very nuanced question, and thank you for that, right? So I think I answer how reliable it is, right? There are many studies to show the reliability, and in many cases, we have to prove above 90% reliability. And there are certain, I want to say, there's parameters around this. So for example, right, the Edwards hypotension tool, okay, when they predict, right, the accuracy is less for when the future occurs. So for example, right, the accuracy is about 80% in predicting hypotension 20 minutes into the future. But when you go to 5 minutes in the future, it goes above 95%. You bring down to 1 minute, it goes to almost 100%, right? Because the closer you are to the event, there's more data points, and the more the algorithm can crunch and do that, right? Like for example, right, it's easier to tell the weather in the afternoon versus the weather tomorrow versus the weather next week. So you can think about that, right? Okay. So in terms of data points, right, like I said, it's a machine learning, and companies are constantly, right, gathering data to validate the algorithms, to update it, to improve on it, right? Like we said, okay, 20 minutes is 80%. So how do you bring the 80% to 90%? And how bring the 90% to 95%, right? With more data points, and then, and improvement and refinement of the algorithm, right? Which is why, for example, right, you take an example of a self-driving car, right? It took many years for Google to develop to where they are, right? 10, 15, 20 years. Right? Tesla, right, caught up with Google in less than 5 years. Why did they catch up, right? It's about data, right? Everybody who buys a Tesla, who drives a Tesla, feeds information to Tesla company, and then they have multiple. So they were able to catch up, So in the world of AI, actually data is the king, to be honest, right? This is what I understand in talking to the R&D engineers in Edwards, right, who are very smart, who have lots of degrees that are beyond me, right? They say the bottleneck is not developing the algorithm. The bottleneck is having enough data points to validate, to make sure and refine the algorithm to the accuracy level that's required. That's where we're coming, right? So now, whether doctors will blindly follow, to be honest, I don't know. I would hope that doctors don't blindly follow, right? Doctors have many years of training, right? In many cases, over 10 years of training, right? It's part of it is to hone their systems and hone on that, right? So abdication of technologies and all of this, if the training systems are correct and the thing of that, and a lot of it you can't tell, right? But you would imagine that it would not lead to that, right? Because AI is not meant to replace, it's meant to augment and help the doctor make better decisions. At the end of the day, the doctor still have to make the decision.
Great. So
Thank you.
also it's great to know that our chairman, Mr. Pavan Chaudhary, is also listening to you, sir.
Thank
Uh,
you.
he also has a couple of questions.
Yes.
Is malware in medical equipment a real threat? That's one. And the second is, can bias creep into AI if the algorithm making is done only in the West?
Okay. So number one, yes, malware is a real threat, to be sure. Okay. And many companies like Edwards also, right? We make sure that information security is top of the mind, right? In fact, that's really important. Uh, you know, our one of our R&D centers for software is actually in India, right? So we have many engineers, R&D engineers in India on software to make sure that right. So that's the first one. The second question, if you could repeat again, Mr. Chaudhary,
Sure.
what was?
Can bias creep into AI if the algorithm
Oh, okay.
making is done only in the West?
Yes, thank you. Uh, the answer is probably not. Okay, because at the end of the day, okay, human physiology is human physiology, right? That being said, okay, we do ensure, at least in Edwards, I can only speak for Edwards, to make sure that we have a good representation of different races in develop and getting the data, the waveform data that I talked about, to develop the hypotension prediction tool, right? So even though the data itself actually, is collected out of Europe and US, we make sure that the ratio makeup, because today's world, right? We have Indians living in US, we have Indians living in Europe, we have Chinese living anywhere, we have Asians living, we have Caucasians, we have, Africans living everywhere, right? So to make sure that they are, at least we get a good representation across.
True. Yeah. So now I'll just jump into all the questions. Mr.
Okay.
Pavan Datta has asked, how is AI different than rule-based decisioning?
Okay. So I think the difference is, a rule is static. AI is dynamic, right? It's taking information, it's processing, it's learning, and from there, that's the main difference, right? Static is like, okay, look, if A do B, B do C, right? It's very linear. Whereas AI is a dynamic decision making.
Okay. Mr. Reddy has asked, can you please let me know in how many hospitals your product is deployed and what is the response from healthcare professionals?
Okay. So in terms of the actual number, obviously, I'm not, I'm not privileged to divulge, right? I would say many of the top Indian hospitals, right, are looking at this technology, right? And as what it is, right? We launch it, we deploy it, and many of the top Indian hospitals are actually, looking to acquire and and utilize this technology. In all honesty, right? COVID has been very difficult, right? We all know this, and we are impacted also, right? We actually launched this a couple years ago, and only late last year we were able to bring it to the hospitals for various reasons, right?
Dr. Ishani Hanspal has asked, besides critical care, what is the
Yeah.
scope of AI in other areas of healthcare? If there is any, is there any AI solution being tested or already available in those areas of healthcare?
Yes. So they are right. I had a list over there in one of my slides. Uh, the one that is, I would say next to critical care medicine, right? Another one that is very obvious that you see a lot of is in oncology. Okay, looking at scans to recognize tumors and the such, right? That's one area that there's a lot that's very well characterized from AI.
Great. Santanu Roy has asked, image data is predominantly important in medical application of AI.
Mhm.
However, how far do you see integration of other clinical data will be possible in a reasonable time frame to present a situation before an expert within the available computational capability?
Okay. To be honest, I don't really know the answer to that. Right. Today, just like the example I showed, right? A lot of AI is very discrete, and it is based on one specific input, right? Whether in this case it's the blood pressure, right? Another case, image is the image data. Now, that being said, at Edwards, we're also looking at integrating different inputs to give a more involved this a better picture to the clinician, right? For example, we're looking at ways that whether we could see, okay, if the patient going to deteriorate into a crash mode, can we predict whether a patient is feeling pain and how much pain the patient is feeling, right? Especially during surgery, right? They're giving anesthesia, they're asleep, they might still feel pain, but they're unable to respond, right? The technical term here is nociception index, right? So whether can you predict that? And so today, it's very discrete. That's where it is. But in the future, whether you have integration into many different inputs to give a bigger picture of a patient, I don't know. It might come faster than we think, but at the end of the day, it requires a lot of research, a lot of validation of the data to make sure that, hey, look, it operates predictably and in the right manner.
Correct. So, since we're on this subject,
Mhm.
on predictability, uh, there's a question by Mr. Das. He's asked how AI is going to help the medical professional in the future with better diagnosis. And is there a way in AI to restrict wrong diagnosis?
Okay. The answer is yes and no, right? Yes, in a sense that, a lot of times as doctors or humans, we make irrational decisions for whatever reason, based on experience, based on practice, you name it, right? That's not logical. And AI helps eliminate or reduce that. Or at the very least, okay, get the doctor to rethink and have a second thought, say, okay, look, the AI machine monitor is telling me this. I thought it's that. Let me relook and see, okay, and look at all the different parameters and say, okay, yeah, okay, maybe I was wrong about my diagnosis. So that's where the true, I think, the true power of AI comes in. Because at the end of the day, we are all humans, right? And we try to make the decision, but sometimes we don't make it with all the right information in front of us. and our doctors or all of all humans do that, right? And sometimes we make irrational decisions. We all know that, right? But AI is to help us to eliminate that.
So we have a question from the insurance coverage in the AI
Yes.
space.
Mhm.
Does false negatives through AI increases the burden on diagnosis and diagnostics? I believe insurance doesn't cover diagnosis costs until the individual is diagnosed for a treatment. This seems to be creating and shall increase the burden on either the patient or the insurance company. Is this something being discussed upon, and how it is being taken up ahead?
Okay. So yeah, I would say false negatives, can happen anywhere, not just with AI, right? For example, I brought the example of like a COVID test, right? We do have false positives, we do have false negatives. Even those and these technologies of COVID tests is well established, well accepted, right? So now, whether from an insurance perspective, I'm not an expert to comment on this. I would say there are many other colleagues who are in the insurance industry, would probably in a better position than me. I would imagine you have actuarial science to look at it, right? That being said, right, the the medical QMS, right, which is the medical board in US that looks at quality systems, are looking very closely.
Mr. V, I think we just lost you.
I thought I got am I back on or I got disconnected?
Yeah, you're there now. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I don't know what happened. So anyway, I was saying, right, okay, these medical boards are closely looking at it, right, at the very least, and changing in countries like US reimbursement structures. So for example, if a hospital is using this technology, the reimbursement structure will change, right, in many cases. But that will come with time, right? We are at a very nascent stage, at the beginning of stage, right? We're at the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution in
Right.
healthcare. Yes.
So I just have one last question, and this is from the cost perspective.
Yes.
Are AI and ML reducing healthcare costs, and how big data is helping the healthcare usage?
Okay. So the answer is, you know, in the case of adverse hypertension, this technology, the answer is yes. Okay. Uh, there patients. So the cost reduction comes in after the fact, right? There's the acquisition of the cost of the technology, and there's avoidance of all the potential complications that could happen. And there are many studies to show that really from a big picture perspective, it is cost effective, right? And it's about cost avoidance, right? And not only that, right? If they are if the rate of complications are reduced, number one, the patient can get back to work faster, they can be productive faster, therefore they can go back and contribute to society faster, and it'll free up hospital beds for other patients that really need it, right? And not the patient is coming back because a complication has occurred. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does as well. So I think it was a very enlightening session. We have pretty much covered all questions, and thank you for that as well. Such an insightful and engaging conversation, and a privilege to hear you. Our guests and I have been hooked on till the very end, and I've taken home several nuggets from today's discussion. And thank you to our leaders in the audience for joining us and for staying till the very end, and for sharing excellent questions as well.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wee. Looking forward to engaging with you soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.